This is a Talaria Sting that we bought from a police auction here in the UK, and in Series 1 we cleaned this bike up and started taking a look at some of the damage on this bike. So if you haven't seen episode 1 of this series, you can click above me now and go back and watch that video. But if you have seen Series 1, you'll know some of the damage on this bike, such as the gearbox being completely obliterated, the chain is wrapped around the bike, nearly every single piece of this bike has something wrong with it. So we're here to fix this bike up and try and turn trash to treasure. So we're going to get straight into doing some work on this bike and pulling apart the pieces before we try and put anything back together. And first things first, we need to get rid of this chain off the back of the bike. So now Jay's taken the chain off in a very Matt Francis official channel style. We're going to start attacking the motor and everything else on this bike. So our next plan of action is to take the bash guard off, drop the motor out, try and get this gearbox out, and then try and put the motor back in so we can try this bike and actually see if it turns on. So without further ado, let's start attacking this absolute scrap Talaria. Let's do it. And almost instantly we came across our first problem, a rounded bolt. But it didn't take long to sort out. And with that bolt now out the way, we could carry on removing the bash guard so we could get access to the motor. With the bash guard removed, we could also then remove the gearbox cover. So when you buy your Talaria from police auction, every Talaria comes standard with a battery rising, soggy glove. And here's me getting hit in the head by a pheasant. Yeah! There's actually another glove in here. Oh, it's absolutely sopping. There's another glove in here as well. Oh, it's a sock. This one's not a glove, it's a sock. It's got a hole in it as well, bro. Oh, I think we're out of secrets and surprises now. It is absolutely rotten in there. With that excitement out of the way, we then continue to remove the motor by undoing these phase cables that go to the back of the controller, as well as unplugging all of the plugs for the loom. We then started to remove the bolts for the motor, and there was 2 of these either side of the bike, as well as a bolt which went to the gearbox mount. Then we could work on dropping the motor out of the bike.
Let's pull it out and get the part off after.
Let's go. She's out.
Oh, we've ripped that part.
Oh, good. Dang. Oh, the gearbox is knackered anyway, really, isn't it?
There we go.
Scrap, mate.
Scrap.
And now we had the motor out of the bike, we could fully assess the damage to the gearbox. The gearbox is attached to the motor, and we could see here that there was quite a bit of damage involving a lot of cracks around the gearbox casing. And it decided to relieve itself on the workshop floor. So now we've managed to get the motor out of the Talaria, we can fully assess the damage on this gearbox. And well, it's safe to say that the gearbox is so I guess the next plan of action is to strip this gearbox off the motor, because we're definitely not going to be putting this back on the bike. And then we'll try and put the motor back in the bike and see if we get any sort of life out of this bike whatsoever. Let's do it. We then started to strip the gearbox from the side of this motor. The motor itself is very similar to a Sur-Ron motor, but with a gearbox on the side. So we had to remove these 8 bolts to get the gearbox off of the motor. Yo, it's literally just broken half.
That's what happens.
No way. Look at that big bearing.
Yeah, it's got a nice bit of rust on it.
Ah, be a reet. Bit of GT85 on that bad boy. Oh, damn.
Right, so
She's creamy. Then with the top casing removed and some damage assessed, we could remove the rest of the gearbox from the motor. Then for some reason we blasted the motor with electrical contact cleaner, which didn't really make a difference seeing as the motor was in such a state. So we've now got the motor and the gearbox fully apart. The gearbox is in a number of different pieces. The oil inside of the gearbox looks like it's milky as anything, and if I know anything about oil, when oil mixes with water it then goes to this sort of milky colour, which is what we're seeing here. So I think the gearbox is just completely scrapped. There's no point really keeping anything from the gearbox, if I'm honest. So I guess the next plan of action is we take what's left of this motor, we put it back in the Talaria, and we crack on with the next few jobs to see whether we can get this motor working and see if this motor is actually salvageable. I don't know much about Talaria. I've done mainly work on Sur-Rons before. This motor looks similar to a Sur-Ron motor but still different because it's had the gearbox in it. I don't know if these motors are meant to be turned on without the gearbox on it or anything, but I guess there's only one way to find out, and that's by doing it. So let's crack on and get this motor back in the bike. The next stage was to remove the battery lid from the bike. This is because it was broken and we needed access to the ignition and the loom underneath. So with the two E-clips removed from either side of the battery lid, we could slot the battery lid out of place. We don't have keys for this bike, so we need to get this old ignition out of the way. For ease of access, I undid the key plate by these two Allen key bolts, then unplugged the old ignition from the bike. With the fresh ignition in hand, we could go ahead and slot this back into the key plate. Now we can click it into place. Then, making sure that the keys definitely work in this ignition, we could go ahead and reinstall the ignition back onto the bike by plugging it in and reinstalling the two Allen key bolts. In the meantime, Jay worked on putting the motor back into the bike with the 3-phase cables going to the controller, as well as the hall sensor plug and the 12-volt converter plug. Finally, we could get the battery dropped into the bike and insert the plug for the battery. So now we've got the Talaria somewhat put back together with the motor phase cables going to the controller, the 12-volt converter connected, the brand new ignition and the brand new key all ready to go. We've even put the battery in the bike and plugged the battery in, so that's ready to go as well. The next thing we need to do is turn that key and see A, if we've got power to this bike, and B, if we can get any response from this motor whatsoever. So let's take a look at the front of the bike and see if we can get this bike on. So, moment of truth, what do we reckon? Is it going to have power? Is it not going to have power? There's only one way to find out. So unfortunately we are going to have to end that episode here, but if you do want to see more on this Talaria, you're going to have to hit that subscribe button down below. I'm Matt Francis, this is Jay, we're signing out. Peace.